Eli Navaro stands on the loading dock behind the diner, the night air smelling of fried onions and hot grease. He wipes his hands on his apron and watches the highway lights blink like distant stars. Tonight is the last night before applications close for Feast and Flame, the national cook-off that every young chef in the city names in whispers. He carries his mother's old spice tin in his pocket like a talisman, its edges dented from years of being passed around a kitchen table. He intends to apply but doubts it's heavy in his ribs, cold and stubborn. He thinks about the laundromat 3 blocks over, the one his father started with 2 machines and a stubborn grin. Rent doubled last month, and the notice on the counter reads, "Final warning" in block letters. Eli thinks about late nights, folding shirts under flicker bulbs, the steady clink of coin against metal, and the way Mrs. Alvarez always thumbs the collar of each sweater like it is someone she loves. If he wins, the prize is enough to save that place and teach him to breathe without counting bills. If he loses, he will haul home the same tired apron and the same small life. Before he leaves for the diner, Eli spends an hour at the laundromat helping a man with a stroller who cannot operate the new card reader. He smells the starch and hears the soft clack of buttons as the man fusses with the strap. The child giggles and clutches a rag that smells like soap and cinnamon. Small chores tie him to the neighborhood like a rope, and he does not want that rope to fray. He steps inside the diner with a paper bag the size of a hope. Ruth, who runs the kitchen like a conductor with pots, looks up from a sizzling pan. Ruth says, "You're late." Her voice is mostly a smile. Ruth learns everything she can from the lives she feeds. She notices the way Eli carries worry like a second jacket. The application for Feast and Flame sits on the back counter, glossy and taunting. Eli fills it with hands that know grease as if it were ink. He lists his experience. 3 years as a line cook, a batch of midnight pies, a dozen grateful nods, and not much else. He sends a single photograph of a plated stew that looks like comfort folded into a bowl. A week later, he learns he got a callback. The email feels unreal in his palms. It is both a promise and a dare. His friend Sasha dances around the kitchen in socks when she reads it, knocking over a salt jar like she is scattering meteorites. Sasha says, "You are actually doing this." Her voice is small and fierce. Eli meets Ruth on a Tuesday that smells like old lemon cleaner. Ruth says, "You do this, and I will not let you burn your hands off." She folds a towel the way she folds plans. Neat, certain. Ruth has decades of knives and honors folded into her memory. She left a restaurant world that chewed up reputations for glory. Ruth says, "I believe in grit dressed as grace." The preliminary round is a kitchen in a warehouse repurposed with fluorescent bulbs and stainless islands. Contestants exchange business cards like talismans of their own. Bryce West is there, sleeves rolled, hair slick with pomade, the culinary school crest on his jacket glossed like a metal. He smiles like steam, warm and calculated. Bryce says, "You're cute. This is for serious people." His words are a blade wrapped in a grin. Eli sets his jaw, tucks his spice tin into the pocket of his jacket, and listens to the tick of the prep clock. He feels like a small coin in a shiny fountain full of polished silver. The tasting begins. Judges move like careful birds, taking a sliver of this, a dip of that, their faces blank as masks. Eli's dish is a stew with charred tomatoes and cumin from the small tin and a smear of bitter green herb his aunt taught him to chop. He plates with hands that no hurry. His mother says, "Taste like you mean it." One judge narrows an eye and says nothing. Another judge says, "There's a soul here." Bryce's dish arrives polished like a glossed magazine. He watches the judges with a complacent grin, the kind of grin a man has when he expects applause. When the judges whisper about precision and technique, Eli feels the ground move. Then a judge says, "Eli Navaro, into the next round." Light leaves his body in a small, surprised laugh. People clap like a polite rain. Bryce's smile does not crack, but for a sliver it looks thin. Ruth squeezes Eli's shoulder, and Sasha cries into her palm, embarrassed and thrilled at once. Eli leaves the room with the taste of coriander and possibility in his mouth. Acting on momentum is its own kind of danger. Ruth insists on teaching him how to turn pressure into a rhythm instead of a panic. They construct a practice kitchen on the second floor of the laundromat after the owners close up. The machines hum like a chorus, and the scent of soap mixes with simmering spices. Sasha becomes the unofficial sous chef and the person who steals leftover fries under the table. She carries a small notebook full of ideas that look like a child's treasure map. Sasha says, "We will make you unforgettable." Her optimism is stubborn in the way Ivy is stubborn to Brick. They practice until Eli's hands know menus like prayers. A subplot blooms in the back of the laundromat. Mrs. Alvarez stops coming. She used to bring a thermos and sit by the folding table with a newspaper folded over her knees. One night, Sasha notices the chair empty and the thermos untouched. Mrs. Alvarez's son says, "Rent is a tax on loyalty now," and explains that some people can no longer pay. Eli sits on the laundromat steps and watches machinery sigh in the dusk. He thinks of the prize money as a crutch he can lend the shop, but he also knows that winning changes him into someone who might never slip back through the same door. He feels guilt like a cool weight and a hunger that is not just about food. The semi-final challenge is a live cook-off on a stage that smells of hot metal and anticipation. Cameras circle like curious gulls. The host, a poet of hyperbole, narrates with a voice trained to make small things sound huge. Bryce wastes no time in staring down competitors like a man marking his territory. Bryce says, "I'll see you in the finals," as if the world is a straight line to his success. Midway through, a pan erupts on Eli's station. Oil spits like a beast dislodged. The flames lick the edge of the hood, and the fire alarm gives a panicked squeal. Bryce shoots a glance, expression a carved thing of triumph. Eli's hands move on their own. Lid, turn off gas, towels dampened, breath steady. Ruth's voice floats through the chaos, calm as a harbor. The judges take a taste despite the smell of smoke. Eli's dish tastes like late nights and shared bread, like apologies and small celebrations. He advances. The warehouse erupts in noise as people realize the upset is real. Sasha hugs him so hard he thinks ribs are rearranging themselves. Between rounds, Bryce corners him with a new tactic. Charm. Bryce says, "It's about the brand, Navaro. Look the part." He slaps a business card down with nails painted to match his tie. Eli says nothing. He folds the card into the pocket of his jacket like a note he will file under. Not yet. Ruth watches him with a face that reads like a ledger, worry and pride stacked like receipts. Ruth says, "I left a kitchen once because I was too proud to ask for help." She pins the memory to the board and says she will not let him make the same mistake. Ruth tells him about a dinner where she refused to change an overcooked protein because critics watched. She lost that service in a partnership after she chose perfect technique over people. Her hands tremble slightly as she admits she was lonely and hungry in a way she hadn't named then. Eli listens and feels his own stubbornness reflected, like a small, honest mirror. The minor subplot tightens. Mrs. Alvarez calls and says her son can only make one payment this month. Eli aches with the size of the problem. He considers selling his mother's spice tin, an unthinkable fracture. Sasha refuses. She launches a small fundraiser, bringing in neighbors who remember the laundromat's winters and summers. They raise a handful of coins and more than that. They raise the sense that the shop matters. The final is set in a grand tent with lights like constellations and a crowd that sounds like waves. Competitors file in with knives and philosophies. Bryce's team arrives in matching jackets and shoes like glass. Eli steps forward with an apron that has patches, fingerprints, and the faint scent of lemon. He chooses to cook the thing his mother used to make when the lights went out. A stew of beans, tomato, and a secret blend of spice. The challenge has a twist. The contestants must create a dish using an unfamiliar ingredient revealed in a silver box. When the box opens, everyone gasps. Inside is a mound of sea beans, a plant that tastes sharp and runs like salt to the tongue. Bryce snorts and outlines technical adaptations in 2 minutes. He talks in terms of foams and reductions. Eli listens and feels the plant's texture in his mind like an echo of something he'd seen on a fishing trip as a child. At the line, time ticks like the laundromat's old wall clock. Eli's fingers find his mother's spice tin, and his heart beats the rhythm of an engine. He remembers his mother's hands, the way she laughed when a pot boiled over, the way she hummed when she added cumin. He smells tomato and earth and a memory of rain on hot concrete. Bryce's food gleams like a model. He layers foam and smoke like a trick. It looks like a lesson in how to make the spotlight love you. The crowd ooze. Cameras linger on style and shine. Eli's station is messier, but his movements are confident in a way that feels like home. He roasts sea beans until they crackle, stews tomatoes until the edges are brave, and folds in the spice as if telling a story. Disaster slides into the final like a stray animal. A generator hiccups and dies. The tent blinks into a hush, lights sinking into a soft dusk. Electric tools go mute and ovens lose their temper. Contestants curse softly and elbow each other in the dark. An announcer's voice trembles. "We have a technical issue." Bryce panics in a way that looks like someone pruning a perfect bush and finding it rotten. He fumbles a torch and his mise en place dissolves into scattered art. Eli breathes. He gathers his ingredients by candlelight and feels his hands learning the contours of dishes without machines. Ruth says, "You can." She appears at his elbow with a can of fuel and a face that is both stern and steady. They improvise with charcoal and a camp stove borrowed from a volunteer. Heat returns like a surprise applause. Contestants adapt. Some break. Some thrive on the smallness of it. Eli builds flavor by memory, not by machinery. He times a simmer by the sound of bubbles and the sweetness of the steam. Sasha passes him a spoon with a look that says, "This is for all of us." A sudden gust flutters the tent, scattering napkins like excited birds. For a terrifying second, ash lands in a simmering pot, and Eli must decide whether to salvage or start anew. He chooses salvage, skimming, adjusting salt, brightening with an acid he chops from a lemon. Those small, decisive moves feel like the same ones he learned on the folding table of the laundromat. In the final minute, Bryce tries to dazzle with a smoking cloche. It looks like a trick and feels like a deflection. Eli plates with hands that tremble but do not betray him. He garnishes with the last pinch from the tiny tin. The judges circle like owls in the dusk, tasting light and listening to the crowd. A judge tastes and lets a sound escape that is nearly a laugh, half surprise, half delight. The host says, "Eli Navaro." Time slows the way a good sauce thickens. Eli hears the crowd like a soft rain. Then the word he has been marching towards becomes an instrument. Winner. The tent erupts like a kettle freed. People throw their hands up as if release was a thing they had been holding together. Bryce folds his face into something guarded and small. He acknowledges Eli with the leftover of a smile that is not generous. Later, in a quieter room filled with boxes and paper, Bryce approaches Eli with a different kind of weight. Bryce says, "I could have been kinder." He sounds surprised at his own confession. Eli nods and accepts the apology with the same openness he learned from a community that forgives small things often. Ruth cries in a way that sounds like an old radio playing a sad song, then turning into jazz. Sasha claps until her palms sting and announces she always knew it. Eli holds the trophy like a coin that returns the year. He feels dizzy with relief and disbelief. He calls his father from a payphone, and the old man's voice cracks with pride through the tinny line. They make a plan that sounds like work and love stitched together. After the lights, there is a line of small, human reckonings. Eli signs paperwork that reroutes the prize to the laundromat's accounts first. He thinks the numbers over like reading a map. The landlord receives a check with a phone call that sounds like a door opening, not a slam. Mrs. Alvarez returns with a pot roast and tears on the rim of her eyes, bringing a chair back to the folding table. Ruth tells a story in the kitchen that becomes a lesson wrapped in a joke. Ruth says, "You didn't fit their mold, Eli. You fit something better." Her hands wave like someone conducting an invisible band. Bryce takes a job in a restaurant that requires less applause and more hours. He studies humility like it is a recipe. Sasha starts a blog that features the laundromat's oddities and small victories. People begin to come because the place communities. Months pass in a gentle fold. The laundromat hums with new washers and with old conversations. Eli teaches a night class about food that saves money without losing heart. He calls it Kitchen for Keeps. Neighbors bring recipes with stains on the margins and stories wrapped in napkins. The community tastes itself again. Eli keeps the spice tin on a shelf behind the detergent, beside a jar of pins and a small flashlight. On Tuesdays, he pulls it down and lets students smell it before he teaches them about char and patience. He remembers the moment he almost sold it and feels the small, hot fear from then like a scar. It does not hurt anymore. One evening, as the sun slides caramel across the laundromat windows, Ruth says, "You earned this the hard way." Her voice is plain and full. Eli ties on an old apron and smells the fabric of a career that tastes like work, not magic. He smiles at a mirror smudged with soap and flour. Sasha moves into a space above the laundromat and turns it into a tiny bakery that sells bread with names like Sunday and Comeback. Bryce returns sometimes carrying boxes and new ideas. He offers to teach a technique, and his tone is steady, less sharp. Mrs. Alvarez becomes the unofficial mayor of folding, handing out cookies and advice like both were equally important. People begin to gather on Friday nights for soup and records, and the laundromat becomes a small stage for neighborhood stories. At the anniversary of the save, the community gathers. There is music that sounds like old records and new playlists. Eli cooks a simple stew, the one that won him a moment he will not forget. People queue with plates and stories. He watches Mrs. Alvarez hand a sweater back to a teenager with a grin, and his chest feels wide and warm. The reporter asks the question that everyone wants answered. The reporter says, "What's the secret?" She is pen-poised, eyes bright. Eli says, "It's not magic, it's listening." He lifts the spice tin and lets her smell the air that rises from it. He presses his palm over the tin like a vow. Ruth says, "We all make good." Sasha takes a photograph of the group, the laundromat's machines in the background humming their steady chorus. Eli stands at the center, not as someone who arrived perfect, but as someone patched with work and choices. The stakes never vanish. The landlord's threats might return in time. Taxes will always be taxes. Life will always need coin. But victory reshapes a horizon. It buys minutes of peace and new habits of courage. Eli cooks because he loves the way flavors talk to one another, and because he can now answer questions with options, not fear. He keeps the tin, the town, and the lessons tucked close as a recipe he passes to anyone who asks. At night, he locks the laundromat door and pauses on the threshold. He listens to the machines breathe. The city hums beyond the glass, full of other people's fights and small salvations. He breathes and feels the quiet claim of a life that changed by insistence, by practice, and by a handful of people who refuse to let him sink. Then he turns the key and walks home, pockets empty and full at once.